I'm awakened by the first watch sergeant at 3 a.m. on the day after Christmas. Mom is in the hospital, he tells me in his folksy Bakersfield accent. Everything is fine. He gives me a phone number to call later that day. As soon as the phones are available, the guard puts me on. I talk to one of my brothers-in-law and my mother-in-law. Anita is in labor. My loyal and lovely friend Linda is with her. Later I learned Anita had left the visiting room, gone back to her apartment, and told the baby she was ready before going to sleep. She had woken up a few hours later in labor. She refused any pain medication and struggled through 12 hours of agony that ended with forceps pulling my big daughter out. All in attendance told me how brave Anita was, how composed and focused. I'm not surprised. When we finally talk, she sounds exhausted but triumphant. I have never experienced more intense and overwhelming love than at that moment, nor have I felt more determined to exceed myself. 2 weeks later, I'm on my way out to the visiting room, walking across the stale yard that still looks unfinished 10 years later. The concrete walls have never been painted. What grass there is consists of clumps, and that areas that were dirt are still dirt now. After more than a decade of operations, there is still no sign on the door to the visiting room. It's simply another steel and plexiglass door. I enter the visiting room area, turn in my identification card, and submit to a search before walking into the room. Anita and Linda are both there, along with an impossibly tiny bundle of pink blanket. Linda is very protective of Anita, as if she's just returned from a battle at sea and doesn't quite have her land legs back. Anita steps toward me. Here is your daughter. I'm in a closed space, a silent white room, just the three of us. When I take the baby into my hands, I marvel at how little she is, how insubstantial and light. My hands are bigger than all of her. Hello, Alia. One of my closest friends, Steve Agin, who has since passed on to greater judgment, was paroled from my cell. A frequent loser, he had grown up a child of Mother California. Like all of us who mastered this universe, he paid for the lessons with a large measure of his humanity. Unlike me, he didn't have a long-term love affair to temper the ill effects. After he was paroled, he married a woman he met while she was still a prison guard. They had a son. Shortly after this surprising turn of events, I received a letter from Steve. He was exceptionally well-read, and his letters were always full of sly observation and unexpected insights. This letter's tenor was wholly different, more simple and direct, as he wrote, "I can't explain it, brother, but when I held my son, something inside of me changed. It is as if there is a bell inside that only your children can ring. Holding my daughter, I hear the bell inside me peal. My eyes are flooded with real tears. The feeling is primal and ethereal. A gathering of hairy ape men dancing around a fire, watching the orange sparks twirl up into the cold night air. Right there, wrapped in the quiet, contented ball I hold in my hands. I know I've escaped the bonds of prison. It is a relief to grasp this so completely. What is left of me inside the electric fences can concentrate on living this life, such as it is, and give up the longing for release that crouches in the back of all of our minds. Somehow, I also sense a shift in the great scales. I took a life, without justification or reason. I stole the light from Mr. Fellows. Now I have added light to the interconnected web. This doesn't absolve me of guilt, or release me from my obligation to atone for my actions. But as I stand there, holding in my arms the being I called into existence, I know I have become a contributor, a participant. I have committed the most human of acts, procreation. I am fully a human being, and I have proof. It is another time of great change in the prison system. The past decade of takeaways has created an increasingly hardened class of prisoners. To combat this growing menace, the system has decided to separate the maximum security joints into a more dangerous group called 180s on account of the building's floor plans, and a less dangerous group called 270s. The violence has gotten out of hand, riots are breaking out, guards are being attacked. The solution is obviously to turn the screws tighter. This is the only way the prison commanders know. The associate warden who reassured me that no one really does life without parole would be surprised by the officials of classification committees nowadays, who remind us with relish how we will indeed spend the rest of our lives in prison, till death do us part. In the past 15 years, the prison population has doubled and then doubled again. One lieutenant I worked for, a pilot in his off time, once told me he could fly from Los Angeles to Sacramento, a good 400 miles, by following the lights of the prisons in the Central Valley at night. The crackdown of the 90s is in full swing. I can stay at Tehachapi if I want, but the prospect of greater restriction isn't appealing. Besides, there's the issue of Anita driving up the mountain roads with a new baby. The obvious option is the lone prison in Los Angeles County, a 270 maximum in Lancaster. It'll shave an hour off of her trip. Although leaving any place you've known for 11 years is unsettling, it isn't hard to leave Tehachapi. Unlike Folsom, this is a prison with no hold on my identity. I've lived in cells here that no other man has served time in before. I've married, made love, conceived a child, but I've never felt rooted to the bland, smooth concrete buildings. Even though the mountains rise around the yard and forests are in view, this prison has a featurelessness that sets it apart from the environment. The real world ends definitively at the demarcation line 10 yards on the other side of the fences, where no man's land begins. Inside this circle of towering chain link wrapped at the top by a coil of razor wire, punctuated by a menacing armed obelisks, every 100 yards exists a place out of time. Leaving here will be like leaving nowhere.